3, 2, 1, go ahead.
My name is Eva Schloss. Would you like to ask me some questions about my life?
Why don't you ask me a question about Auschwitz?
Why don't you ask me a question about Auschwitz? Everybody said, never again Auschwitz, we have learned our lesson. But it looked bad again in the world, the hatred, discrimination. So I thought it really necessary to teach and to speak about it.
My name is Pinchas Gutter. I will answer any questions you might have for me.
How old were you when the war ended?
I was between the ages of 13 and 14 when the war ended in 1945.
But he doesn't move much, really.
And that's his choice.
Well, it's very Jewish to talk with your hands.
Yes, it is.
And you should feel comfortable to do.
And you can.
Exactly.
You can.
Yeah, yeah.
It's going to be somewhat normal in 100 years' time to have a person sitting in this position, and it won't seem as unnatural. When you start to get into the questions and you start to get into the dialogue, you kind of lose sight of the fact that the person's not actually there.
Gosh, my goodness.
This is Andrew.
Yes.
Hi, Andrew.
Eva.
Nice to meet you. Lisa.
And this is Lisa, her granddaughter.
Right now there's about 100 cameras on the stage, so we're recording everything in all directions. The idea behind the green is that we can then take out the green and replace it with any other environment that you're going to be talking in the future. So this could be a classroom, it could be a museum, and we can put those backdrops behind you.
In the beginning, I didn't know really how to speak. You know, it's something you have to learn. Eventually, I found my own voice. Okay, here we go.
Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm feeling very well, a little nervous.
Okay. When did you first start telling your story?
Since 1986, I started to speak for the first time, and I haven't really stopped since.
Today is October the 9th, 1996. The survivor being interviewed is Eva Schloss, maiden name Geiringer.
I realized suddenly that people are interested and people do want to know about it. And this was really a big turning point in my life.
This is a repeat after me. My name is Eva Schloss, and I'm a Holocaust survivor.
My name is Eva Schloss. I'm a Holocaust survivor.
I'm actually a recording, so I can't answer that question.
I'm actually recording. I can't answer that question.
I don't remember.
I don't remember.
Maybe you should try to reboot.
Maybe you should try to
Reboot.
rebook.
Reboot.
Rebook.
Okay, never mind. Never mind.
Too technical for me. I don't quite imagine how people will feel about that, to pretend it is somebody really speaking to them who lived in that time 30 or 50 years ago.
How did it feel to wear the yellow star, Eva?
I was quite a stubborn child, and I didn't want to wear the yellow star. I didn't see why that was necessary, and I had a big fight with my mother. I didn't want to, but my mother explained to me very, very carefully and thoroughly why it was dangerous not to wear it.
Can I just tell you, these answers are great. They're just the right length with the right amount of details. Wonderful.
Thank you.
What happened when you arrived at Auschwitz?
Men and women were separated, so people cling to each other and cried, and really, really horrible. And the guards came and beat us apart. And my father took me by the hand and said, Evatje, God will protect you. I often think of actors who do every day the same story. I vary it, because if I would do the same thing all the time, then I might get fed up with it.
Have you come up with a name for the contraption that you're in yet?
Cage.
The cage. Okay.
So describe to us the most emotional situation that you had to face while you were in Auschwitz-Birkenau.
I think the biggest shock I experienced was when I saw my naked mother walking out of this barrack, knowing that she was going to be gassed. I think that was the hardest moment I experienced.
And was she?
She was saved, and we were united. And she lived for a long, long time, till 93 years old. I'd always seen it in front of my eyes. So I lived with it, really, you know? I saw the inside of the cattle truck where we were moved. I saw the arrival in Auschwitz. I saw everything at night, especially when I was not busy. You know, all those images came back. Till I started to speak about it, then I could let go.
Okay, this is over here, right here. These are the gas chambers over here in this area. And these are the forests around here.
Yeah.
The pond where you would have gone to get water is all around this area here.
How does it make you feel looking at that?
Still very confused, because when you were inside, you had no idea
of how big it was around it.
and where and what and how I think you're
exactly.
connected to it.
Yeah.
There's not a day goes by when I'm not thinking about them in one way or another. I wasn't coping at all after the war. And it was Otto Frank who came very often to our house, who saw how I was suffering, and he really helped me a lot. I don't think I ever replaced Anna for him. I personally had the feeling very often, but that he never ever made me really think that, but I just felt it, that when he looked at me, I always thought, is he thinking why did this child survive and why not my own daughter?
Do you remember how you felt about Anne after you read the diary?
I must say I wasn't particularly interested in it at first.
Why not?
I was much too busy to cope with my own grief. Otto Frank says in her diary, when she dies, she would like to live on, meaning she wants to become immortal, and she has succeeded.
How did your daughters cope with having two parents who both experienced trauma?
As soon as they were teenagers and older and started to know more about our history, I think they had difficulties to cope with it, to accept it.
She told us sort of anecdotes and stories, but it was almost like it was someone else's experiences, not her own.
I think there was a certain time where she didn't want to talk about it and was protecting us.
Our whole generation has been uprooted, and as a result of the experiences through which all of us have gone, we have some psychological problems, all of us, one kind or another. And our anchor to the future is our children and grandchildren, which hopefully will find back into normality.
Great day, great day. You're gonna miss us though.
I'll miss it?
Yeah, you're gonna miss
I'm not so sure. So, back to normality.
Normality. And then you still pick to wear grey. Silver.
Yeah, well, I can't go right into a colour after all this.
You need to ease yourself back to colour.
Understand. There we are. Usually, twice a week, I go out speaking. I said to my daughters who think I don't have to do all this, I need that for my sanity. Too hot? Mm-hmm. I got over it, the suffering. The only thing what I still don't get over really, and I don't think I ever will, is the loss.
This project will almost immortalize her so that she can go on telling the story once she's no longer with us. But it is still a story. Really, it's what it is. Unless you live through it, you can't fully identify.
I hope you don't forget what you've heard here today. Goodbye. Thank you very much. Thank you. It's a pleasure for me to be here.
Look at that.
Good evening. My name's Craig Morgan, and I have the great honor of being the mayor of this great city of Round Rock. Welcome to our city, and welcome to my home church, the Fellowship. Real quick, I just want to introduce a couple of other council members that came with us tonight. Councilmember Flores, Councilmember Baker, Councilmember Peckham, Councilmember Montgomery. You know, when Rebecca, a couple of weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, whenever I saw her and she asked about would we be interested in doing something, it was a no-brainer. And Eva, I saw your video where you said you started speaking in 1986. Don't quit, because your message is more important today than any time right now in our history.
That's right.
And well, I appreciate it as an elected official. I'll read a proclamation from the city of Round Rock for you. We have a little coin for you as well to take back when you go home, all right?
Wonderful.
Let me put my glasses on because I'm getting old and blind, so. Whereas Eva Geiringer Schloss was born in Vienna, Austria in 1929 and grew up to become a Holocaust survivor, peace activist, international speaker, teacher, and humanitarian. And whereas when Hitler's army annexed Austria, Eva and her family were forced to immigrate to Belgium in 1938 and later to Holland in 1942, where she befriended diarist Otto Frank, and after 2 years of hiding, was captured on her 15th birthday and taken to Auschwitz-Birkenau death camp. And whereas after spending 9 months in the camp, Eva and her mother were liberated from it in January of 1945 and later returned to Amsterdam, where her mother eventually married Otto Frank, Anne's widow father, and whereas even with suffering the burden of loss, the bitterness of injustice, the humiliation of dehumanization, and mental, emotional, and physical scars of imprisonment, she survived with enough courage to lead as a normal life as possible, loving her husband, mothering her children, owning a business, and becoming a trustee of the Anne Frank Educational Trust in the United Kingdom. And whereas 40 years after her unspeakable experience, Eva devoted herself to Holocaust education, traveling the world to address more than 1,000 audiences, and now at almost 90 years old is one of the last touring Holocaust survivors, teaching the lessons of forgiveness and the consequences of indifference to injustice. And whereas her insightful, soul-searching message reminds us that life is precious and fragile, that the power of good is immeasurable, and that love makes a difference. Now, therefore, I, Craig Morgan, Mayor of the City of Round Rock, do hereby proclaim Saturday, March 23rd, 2019, as Eva Schloss Day in the City of Round Rock, and encourage all citizens to wish her ongoing good health and happiness in her continuing mission to share her moving, important, matchless personal stories so that the citizens not only of Round Rock, but of the world may never forget. Proclaim this 23rd day of March 2019, Craig Morgan, Mayor, City of Round Rock, Texas.
Beautiful. Thank you very much.
Our emblem on it. Oh, we got it backwards. Our emblem on it.
By the city. Wonderful. Thank you very much. Thank you, sir.
You're so welcome.
I won't forget to visit to this beautiful city. I'll never forget that. Thank you.
Now I'm going to have Rabbi Neil Blumoff come up.
On Easter
מאמין באמונה שלמה בביאת המשיח אני מאמין באמונה שלמה בביאת המשיח אני מאמין באמונה שלמה בביאת המשיח ואף על פי שישמע מהיה אחכה לו בכל יום שיבוא ואף על פי שישמע מהיה אחכה לו בכל יום שיבוא. I believe with perfect faith in the coming of a better time, in the coming of a Messiah. And even though this Messiah tarries, takes his time, I do not forget, and I still wait every day. I wait for this time. I wait for this Messiah. A couple of months ago, I came back from Poland, leading a delegation of, helping to lead a delegation of students from the University of Texas. And one of the days we were in Krakow, visiting with a woman who, with her sister and mother, hid a young girl, a Jewish girl, in their apartment. And while we were listening to her talk, one of the people with us proclaimed as they saw these 18 to 22, 25-year-olds and said, "This is the last generation that will hear from a Holocaust survivor herself." And that sent a chill in the room. So thank you so very much for dedicating your time to coming to this sacred place and being together and offering hope to our parched souls, a reinvigoration of what could be. It is my honor to introduce Ms. Daryl Klott, a graduate of the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse. Ms. Klott retired from La Crescent, Minnesota High School in 2004, where she taught a comprehensive unit on the Holocaust for several years in her English classes. The classes inspired her to attend the Teachers Summer Institute on Holocaust and Jewish Studies and Jewish Resistance in Poland and Israel in 2001, and she is currently on their Alumni Advisory Board. As her interest in the Holocaust grew, Ms. Klott became a member of the American Friends of the Jewish Fighters Museum Consortium of Holocaust Educators, and is the founder of the Midwest Holocaust Education Consortium. She is a teacher fellow at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. She teaches history of the Holocaust in the undergraduate and adult learning programs at Viterbo University and leads Holocaust educator workshops. Among many other awards, Ms. Klott received the Ellis Island Medal of Honor, presented on Ellis Island in New York to American citizens of diverse origins for their outstanding contributions to their communities, nation, and world. Thank you. Ms. Klott will graciously serve as the evening's moderator. Ms. Schloss. Oh, you can clap for Ms. Claude, of course. Let's do that.
Yeah.
Ms. Schloss, as you've heard, was born in Vienna, Austria in 1929. In 1938, Germany invaded Austria, causing many Jewish families to flee. Among the emigrants were 8-year-old Eva Geiringer, with her mother, father, and brother, Heinz, moved first to Belgium and then to Holland, where she and her family went into hiding. And one of her neighbors in this time was a German Jewish girl of the same age. Her name was Anne Frank. The two girls became friends and playmates. Ultimately, both girls and their families were betrayed and deported to the Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp. Eva's father and brother of blessed memory did not survive. Anne, her mother and brother also did not survive, each of blessed memory. They didn't survive the atrocities of the concentration camp. However, Eva and her mother Fritzi did survive and were liberated by the Russians, eventually becoming repatriated to Amsterdam. Eva moved to London in 1951 to train as a professional photographer, working in a commercial studio for 5 years and marrying Eva Schloss in 1952. In 1953, Eva's mother Fritzi married Otto Frank, making Eva Otto's stepdaughter. And Eva helped get Otto, her stepfather, get Anne's diary published. Eva and Eva Schloss have raised 3 daughters, Caroline, Jacqueline, and Sylvia, and also are blessed with 5 grandchildren. Tzvi, Zichrono Livracha, may his memory be a blessing, passed away in 2016. Ms. Schloss ran an antique shop in Edgware, London for 25 years. Anybody remember going into that? Since 1986, Eva Schloss has devoted herself to Holocaust education and global peace. She is a Holocaust survivor, a peace activist, international speaker, teacher, and humanitarian. She has recounted her wartime experiences in more than 1,000 speaking engagements. Very recently, meeting with high school students in Newport Beach, California, just a couple of weeks ago, after the students were caught saluting a swastika that was specially arranged out of cups during a game of beer pong at a party. She expresses confidence that these young people have learned a lesson for life. Eva has also said, Anne Frank still believed in the good of mankind. As she says, I sometimes wondered, would she still believe that if she survived? She has written 3 books. After Auschwitz, Eva's Story, A Survivor's Tale by the stepsister of Anne Frank, and The Promise, and has had a play, And Then They Came for Me, written about her life. The staff and the volunteers at the fellowship are proud to bring you this very special and moving presentation. May we listen, may we hear, may we act. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Are we ready?
I'm ready, yes.
I feel like I'm going to interview the Queen of England. But she's even more special than that. Okay, let's begin with Hitler. How on earth was he able to come to power?
Well, it is really very, very important to learn a little bit of history, how such a man who had no experience, who was actually a failed artist, without any education. He was just a simple soldier in the First World War, was able to lead in Europe the most cultured, educated people to follow him and to eventually make the most atrocious decisions and killings of millions of people going along with such a band is really a mystery for me. And I've done a lot of research about this, and it was really, you know, the fault of the First World War from 1940 to 1918 with Germany and Austria, who were the biggest powers at the time in Europe, lost. And there was a Versailles Treaty, a peace treaty, from the British, the French, and America, which was so difficult for the Germans to digest. There was, Germany became completely a desolate country. There was no work, there were millions of unemployed, there was enormous inflation. 1 million marks was $1. People had to go with a wheelbarrow of paper money to buy a loaf of bread. Children were walking around barefoot, had no food whatsoever. And the German new government tried to put Germany back to a normal life and never succeeded. And then a man came and said, here's an answer, he's going to put things back again to normality. He's going to make Germany big again, the most important country in the world. Well, who wouldn't go along with that? So people really believed it, and I must say a miracle was that at first he did succeed. He started with motorways, the Autobahn. Everybody was going to have a Beetle, the Volkswagen, and things started to get better. I think it must have been a little bit how Roosevelt was able in the 1929 to get the country to work again. I think they must just have printed money. And so, you know, and then when Hitler started to get even more followers, to say all this what happened to us was the fault of the Jews, people went along and accepted that. And so this was, but I mean, of course, Germany suffered as well immensely. After the war, Germany was in ruins, and as well they have lost a whole generation of young men. Mm-hmm. So it was a good lesson for Germany, and really we all thought that from now on there won't be any more wars, but there have been genocides and wars, not necessarily much in Europe, but all over the world. They're still fighting. People lose their homes, people lose family, and there's still this is a big problem, the refugee problem. I was a refugee myself. I suffered a lot being in a new country where I was not accepted with different languages. And this is what many millions of people have to get through if they are lucky enough to find a new home.
Eva, you had a very happy family life in Vienna until you were forced to move first to Brussels and then to Amsterdam. Could you please walk us through those early years?
Well, in Austria, Vienna, if you've ever been there, it's a beautiful, quite small country, but with a beautiful scenery, with mountains and lakes. And I was quite a tomboy, and my father was as well a big sportman. And we went into the mountains, mountain climbing, and in winter skiing, yeah, he was one of the first one who had a car going up all those curves in the mountain. My mother and my brother sat in the back screaming, but I was, I really enjoyed all the excitement. And had grandparents, we were very close to our grandparents and aunts and uncles. And we were, of course, a Jewish family, but what was very important is that in Austria and Germany, you had to have religious education. I don't think you have that in America, but it was compulsory. So about twice a week, the Jewish children were taken out of their class, and we had Jewish education in a different classroom. And after that, we went back to our class, and so it meant that everybody, teacher and children, knew who was a Jew. And as soon as Hitler marched in, the Austrian population changed and became big followers of the Nazis. They stood in the street with big swastika flags and with a Heil Hitler salute, and we Jewish people looked behind our curtains being very scared. My brother, who was 12 years old, he came home just the next day from school, and he looked terrible. Blood was streaming from his face all over. He was full of bruises. His clothes were torn. And when my parents asked him, Heinz, what on earth has happened to you? He said, my own friends did that, and the teacher just watched it happening.
It's hard for us to believe. Tell us about your friendship with Anne Frank.
Well, we were very lucky to be able to get out of Austria. Many of our family members didn't get any visas, not to go out, not to get in anywhere. And after several months, we got letters, first from ghettos, and later the letters stopped. So we settled eventually in Amsterdam, and my father, of course, we had no furniture. We couldn't bring anything out of Austria. He took a furnished apartment on a new area called the Rivierenbuurt, the river area. And it was we made a plan. If ever you go to Amsterdam, visit this area. It's still there, and you will see the home of Anne and us and many other Jewish families who lived there. And if you have living in a relatively small apartment, you have no yards for children to play. So after school, all the local children came out to play on this open area, square. And one day a little girl came to me and asked me, you are new here, where do you come from? I said, from Austria. Oh, so you speak German. I'll take you later up to my apartment. My father will speak German to you because I come from Germany as well. And we became friends, and her name was, as you probably have guessed by now, was Anne Frank. When she asked me about my family, when I told her I have an older brother, she said, oh, when can I come and meet him? Because Anne was actually very interested in boys, with 11 years already. I had boys coming in all the time, you know, so there was no mystery. And so, you know, so for the first few months, life was very, very good. I got a bicycle, and everybody said, you look just like a Dutch girl in Holland's meisje. And it was good, but it didn't last long.
No. Can you tell us what your nickname, or what was Anne Frank's nickname?
Mrs. Quack Quack, because he couldn't stop talking. She was full of stories, and as well, you know, the apartments, there were some steps going up, and she always wanted to sit on top of those steps and amass the whole group of other children, and she was going to tell us nice stories. So she obviously had already a talent as a storyteller.
Yeah. Your father felt that when he moved your family to Amsterdam, they would be safe because Holland had been neutral during World War I.
First World War, yeah.
But unfortunately, Hitler decided to invade Holland May 10th, 1940. Will you please tell us about your going into hiding and then your betrayal?
Well, you know, it came completely unexpected, not just for us, but even for the Dutch and for the Dutch government. And one day, in the night, we heard aeroplanes and guns and things like that, and we put on the radio, and the announcer said, terrible news, the Germans trying to invade our country. But don't worry, we are going to defend ourselves. Well, they had no idea of the mighty already then of the German army. And of course, it was the first time that a civilian city had been bombed in this war. Rotterdam, the second biggest city, a harbor. And the Germans announced on the radios that if you're not going to capitulate, we are going to bomb all your cities. Well, the government couldn't face that, of course, you know. And what was very, very sad, the Dutch royal family fled first to England and later to Canada, which was very discouraging for the people. But you know, you had to make decisions, not just ordinary people, but everybody, even the royalty. And in Belgium, which was occupied after Holland, the Belgian king decided he would try to cooperate with the Nazis to be able to make it easier for his population. But after the war, he was treated as a traitor and he had to abdicate. So you know, any decision you try to make in such a horrible time was a wrong decision. We tried to still escape to England, but it was too late. But so we realized we were caught. And slowly the measures started to come for the Jewish population. And at first it was more a nuisance. You know, we were not allowed to go to cinemas or theaters, children not allowed to go to swimming pool, and not allowed on public transport, where we all had bicycles, and Amsterdam was not a big city, but then we had to hand in our bicycles, we had to give up our radios, and then we were not allowed to mix with Christian people, so it started to become more and more difficult, but still not life-threatening. But then we had to go to Jewish schools, which by itself was good. We had good teachers as well, but the Nazis knew there were a lot of young people, and they really wanted to go after the young people first. So they went with trucks to those schools, told the children, not the whole school, but some classes, we have tractors there, go down. Children had to obey, of course, and in the evening, the parents waited for the children to come home, and they didn't turn up. So they went to the local police, then even to the Gestapo, the Nazi police. Where are the children from the school? They never got an answer. So children were never ever seen again. After the war, we heard that they were sent to Mauthausen, which was a horrific Austrian death camp with stone quarries, and they were just thrown down from the cliffs. So, but as I said, we didn't know that, but nevertheless the children had disappeared.
So your family went into hiding, and then you were betrayed. Talk about the moment when you...
Little bit about
that.
About the hiding. So in 1942, so after 2 years occupation, about 10,000 young people, including my brother and Anne's older sister Margot, who were both 16, and many of their friends, got a call-up notice to be ready in a week with a backpack to be deported to Germany to work in German factories. Well, many Jewish parents were very suspicious about that, because in 1942 we had already heard about the death camps in Germany and Poland where Jewish people were being killed. So they thought, you know, why do they invite Jewish people back into Germany? So my father called us together, and he said he found some wonderful people who are willing to risk their life to give us a safe home. But he couldn't find a family who is big enough to take 4 people, because the apartments are quite small. And so we have to split up. And he said, I will go with my mother and Heinz will go with him. And I started to cry. I didn't want to be separated. And my father explained, if we are in 2 different places, the chance that 2 of us will survive is bigger. So he mentioned survive. And with 13, I think this was the first time that I realized it might be a matter of life and death. And that was really very frightening for me. And so we go into hiding, and the Nazis knew that not everybody had come, so they made house searches. So they knocked on doors, always at night. People had to open, had to let them in and search their homes. So in all the hiding places, we had a hiding place within the hiding place. Meaning that the people from the resistance came, looked over the apartment and made a false partition, made a small room a little smaller, or made a wall in a cupboard, or sometimes even under the floorboards. So you can imagine we never dared to sleep in case a knock would come and they would have catch us.
And then you were betrayed.
And it did happen. After 2 years in hiding, we were betrayed. It's quite a complicated story, but we were betrayed from a Dutch nurse. You know, most people in the occupied countries, of course, hated to be occupied, hated the Nazis, but there were nevertheless in all the countries people who worked together with the Nazis, thinking that when Hitler wins the war, and I must say it did look as if he was going to win the war, then they get better positions. So there were quite a lot of Nazis as well. And this nurse who said she knows a safe hiding place, it was turned out to be a double agent. She really worked for the Nazis, but pretended she was a member of the resistance. And so all 4 of us, so we were in different places, were betrayed. And, you know, at this time, that was in May 1944, we really were afraid our life would end there.
What about the moment when you were put on the boxcar on the train? Do you remember that?
Oh, I remember that very, very clearly. We were first taken to Gestapo headquarters where we were interrogated, then we were taken to prison, then to a holding camp, and all in a matter of a few days. And then on a Friday morning, there were always transport going eastward from this holding camp, and we were put on a list and we were called up to be deported. And not like you transport people, not even like you transport cattle. I call them like a container. Huge metal railway cars with iron doors, just a little slit with a barbed wire across for air, and 80 people were pushed in. There were 2 buckets put in, one with clean water, the other one to be used as a toilet, open bucket for 80 people. Once a day that was changed. Once a day the doors were open and chunks of bread was thrown in like you would feed wild animals. It was unbearably hot, people fainted, people cried, people were hungry. People, there was even in our train, somebody gave birth to a child. It was awful, awful, awful. The only good thing was that it was really the last time that we were still together as a family. And my father, with tears in his eyes, apologized to us that from now on he can't look after us anymore. He said he got us out safely for 2 years, but now you'll be on your own. And my brother Heinz, I just have to tell you a little bit about him. He was a wonderful older brother, and he was actually a wonderful musician. He had a perfect ear, he could play any instrument, he composed, but in hiding he had to be very, very quiet. So he tried something else and he started to paint. And he told me, that was one of the last conversations I had with him, before they escaped from the woman who had blackmailed them and they fell into the hand of this nurse. He hid the painting under the floor, but with a note on it, this belongs to Heinz and Eva Geiringer, and after the war, I'm coming to pick it up again.
Your family arrived at Auschwitz, and you and your mother, Fritzi, or as you called her, Mutti, were separated from your father, Papi, and Heinz. That must have been very difficult.
Well, that was chaotic, as you can imagine. If you've ever been in Auschwitz in this area, you know there was not just Auschwitz was a men's camp, but there were a few other camps. Birkenau was a women's camp, so men and women were never together. Then there was Monoway, a work camp, and as well a few other smaller camps. And at the time we arrived in Birkenau, and we had to jump down from this cattle truck, and the next command was men and women to different sides. And you can imagine that husband and wife, father and daughter, mother and son, saying goodbye to each other, assuming, and in many cases it was true, never ever to see each other on earth. So people started to cry and hold on to each other, didn't want to let go, but eventually they kind of beat us apart, and the men walked away because we were in Birkenau. And then we heard whispers, Dr. Mengele, the camp doctor is coming. Well, you're not afraid of a doctor, really, are you? But in this case, this was an evil man. He decided who was going to live and who was going to die. So the next command, everything was always rows of 5, this way or this way, because then they could count it better, the whole. There were thousands and thousands of people. So rows of 5. And then this Mengele appeared, a man of about 40 years, looking very, very normal, you know, not evil, and you wouldn't be afraid of him when you would see him in the street. And he had a little, like a conductor, a little baton in his hand, and he looked you over just a fraction of a second, and he decided right or left, life or death. We lost about half our transport. No children. All the children went to the wrong side. If a mother had a baby on her arm, but the mother was young, he told the mother to give her child to an older person, and they walked away. And the mother ran after them, wanted to stay with them. She wasn't allowed to.
You arrived at Auschwitz at age 15, and you were there for 8 months. Can you talk a bit about your daily life there, please?
Well, the first thing was, of course, so after this first selection, it's quite important to mention the first day. You know, we had no idea, are we going to live tomorrow? What is happening now? So after those people walked away, of course, we didn't know at that time really what it meant, or we didn't want to know what it meant. So we, the people who were kept there, were herded into the camp, because it was outside the camp, and commanded into a huge, huge barrack. The next command, undressed completely naked. Can you imagine? Mm-hmm. And the SS young people were walking around laughing at our embarrassment. No. Then we were all tattooed. We had to appear in front of a table, and we were tattooed a number on the arm, and they told us, forget you have a name from now on, you're like a piece of cattle with a stamp on you, and whenever we want you, you're only going to be called by your number. And then all our hair was shaved. Still, when we stood there all naked, you know, feeling so embarrassed. And while this was going on, and this is what I object most, you know, there was not necessary to tell us what had happened to the other people. But they started to laugh, and they said, you know, the family you've been separated from, your children, your parents, they were told they were going to have a shower. But they were not going to a shower. Mm-mm. But they went there and undressed naked, of course, and there were pipes. They waited for water, but of course nothing came. And within 10, 15 minutes, people started not to be able to breathe. They fell to the ground, and they were dead. Because through these pipes came Cyclone B, a very poisonous gas, which was even manufactured in Auschwitz itself. And you can imagine how a mother who had been just separated from her child started to scream and cry and break down. And then we were taken out, still naked, and there were huge heaps, one heap of clothes, and we were shown one garment, which could have been a winter coat or a dressing gown. The next heap was shoes. We got 2 shoes, of course never anything which fits you. And then we were taken to our barrack, 3 high, on both sides of the barracks, just large, perhaps the size of this carpet, and 8 people had to sleep there. There was nothing in it. The only thing was lice and bed bugs. Within days, we were covered in lice and bed bugs, which are about the size of your thumb, and they cling to your body, and when you try to push them away, it makes a big hole, bloody hole. All got infected within days. We were filthy. Forget about washing. We never could wash. Toilets, twice a day we were taken out to toilets. It was not toilet, we were just holes. And the whole day, from morning to evening, we had to do physical hard work. We got in the morning a little bit of liquid, then we were taken to work. No lunch break, no rest break, no toilet breaks, the whole day till late in the evening. Then we came exhausted back to the barrack. Then we got our supper, which was a chunk of bread. And then back into the barrack, trying to sleep. We were hungry, we were hot in summer, cold in winter, itchy, worried. Very often you woke up in the morning and the person who slept like a spoon next to you didn't wake up.
You were at the doorstep of death at Auschwitz, and yet you had many miracles happen in your life there. Could you just give us an example?
The first example was at the selection. My mother had got a coat and hat in the holding camp because we were just in the clothes we were arrested in. And at the first selection, my mother gave me this hat and coat. And I didn't even want it because it was a hot May day, but it was a big hat with a big rim. And so when Mengele looked at me, he didn't realize how young I was. So that definitely saved my life. And till her dying days, my mother always said, "Do you remember when I saved your life, when I gave you my hat and coat?" It was, it was really, I would have been selected. There were even girls older than me who went to the wrong side.
On January 27th, 1945, the Russians liberated Auschwitz. How did you find out that Otto Frank was alive?
One day, already towards the winter, we didn't know if it was January or December or November. We only knew it was bitter, bitter, bitter cold, and there were a lot of snow. And the Germans, they realized, but we didn't know, that the Russians were approaching. And so they evacuated the camps. They took every day, emptied many, many barracks, and people disappeared. But as well, many Nazis disappeared because they didn't want to be caught by the Russians. And so there were not many people left. And one morning we woke up, and it was very, very quiet. No dogs barking, no shouting. And the camp was deserted. The Germans had fled. And there were in the women's camp, about 500-600 women left, all actually in very bad health condition. Many, many, many died, even when we were sort of free. Polish people left the camp because they knew where they could go, and we could have left, but, we had nothing, we were ill, we were weak, it was cold, where to go? So we waited, and eventually the Russians came. But they left again, and they went to pursuing the Nazis, and so we were left again on our own. And I said to my mother, I'm going to go to the men's camp to see if I could find my father and brother. Mm-hmm. And so I went there, taking big risks because there was fighting around, and I had to duck because bullets were flying over my head, and it took me 6 hours, and it was only 3 miles. And I got to the men's camp, and there were as well about 500-600 men left. And I looked in all the barracks, and I found somebody who looked very familiar, but he looked very ashen and thin, and I wasn't quite sure. But I went to him, and I said, I think I know you. And he said, yes, I'm Otto Frank, Anne's father, and you are Eva Geiringer. Yes, yes. have you seen my daughters or my wife? And I hadn't seen them because the camp was enormous. But he had seen my father and brother. So at that time, I was really full of hope that they would still, the war will soon end and still be overhead. But it was January, and of course the war didn't end so soon. And the Russians decided they would take us away from there, and they took us eastward because we couldn't go back to the west. And we traveled for 4 months with the Russians till we ended up in Odessa. And there we waited for the end of the war, and Otto Frank was with us. And so eventually there came a New Zealand troop transport ship, and we were repatriated back to wherever we were, all nationalities, and we went back to Holland.
When did Otto Frank find out his family had perished, and when did you and Mutti find out that Papi and Heinz didn't make it?
Coming to Amsterdam, that was of course very nerve-wracking. We hoped our family would be there already because we came there in June and the war had finished in May, so they could have come back already, but there wasn't. So people put adverts in the paper, people went to visit other Holocaust survivors, see if they had perhaps come across those, our families. And so it was, we went to the train station where people kept arriving and so on, nothing. Otto met then 2 women who were there in Bergen-Belsen because the girls had been taken away from Auschwitz. If they would have stayed, they would have survived, because in January they were still very well. They had been deported only in September, but they were taken away, and their camp, Bergen-Belsen, was liberated only in April. So they would have had to wait another 4 months, and that was really, I would not, if I would have been evacuated, I would certainly not have survived either. So he heard that, and as well about his wife. We didn't hear anything, we didn't meet anybody who knew anything about them, but eventually we got a letter from the Red Cross, and very informal, you know, not with any feelings, and it said to my mother, we have to tell you that your husband, Erich Geiringer, and Heinz Geiringer, your son, they knew that, died in Mauthausen, this terrible Austrian death camp, several days before the American army came to liberate that camp. Well, that was our last straw. You know, I always say I have survived because I hoped we would be a family again and life would eventually get back to normal. But when I realized that will never ever happen, I became very, very depressed.
You and your mother were very fortunate. You were really an anomaly because when you got back to Amsterdam, you were able to get your apartment back. That didn't happen very often.
That was practically, nobody was so lucky.
No.
Otto Frank had nowhere to go in his apartment. Other people had moved in. His furniture had been shipped to Germany. And so he went eventually to stay with Miep Gies, who was one of the helpers in the secret annex. And so he lived there. And she had actually, after the family was arrested, she had found the diary. She cleared up there in the secret annex where they were hiding and found on the floor Anne's diary, but as well many, many loose pages, because Anne wrote quite a lot. And she put it in her desk. That was August 1944. And she was sure the war would end and Anne would come back. And she was going to give it back to Anne. And when Otto came, she didn't give it to him, still hoping she can hand it over to Anne. Only when Otto told her that Anne won't come back did she give it to him.
Otto was very lonely, from what I understand, and he started coming over and visiting you and your mother, and then...
He came, well, he went everywhere, you know, wanted to speak to people who had known his girls, wanted to hear more stories about them. And as well, after he had the diary, he was terribly, terribly proud of it. He came to us and said, look, I must show you something. And he opened it, and he said, can I read something? And he started to read, but he burst always into tears. He took him 3 weeks to read it. It was so emotional to him. And he showed it to everybody. He didn't want to publish it. You know, a diary is a very personal document, and he wasn't sure if Anne wanted the public to know about it. But he showed it to many, many people, and he showed it to a history professor, and he said, well, that is your duty to publish it. And so he decided he would publish it, and tried to find a publisher. But you know, after the war, people didn't want to know on the war stories. It took him a long time to find a publisher. And eventually he found a publisher, and they published 1,500 copies, and they were not, they didn't go quickly. Only when it was published in America did it become a bestseller. That was in 1952, so 7 years after the war.
So Otto was coming over and visiting you and your mother, and they eventually fell in love and got married in 1953. And what was it like living with Otto and your mother?
It was not so quick, you know. They were both shy, they were both moaning about their mourning, their first family, you know. And but Otto helped me a lot. I was full of hatred. I just couldn't accept that life would be now without my family. And he, who had lost everybody, had no hatred. And he always told me when, you know, he said, when you hate, the people you hate, they don't know, they won't suffer, but you will suffer. And that was true. I was suffering. I was very, very bitter. And that was, you know, I didn't believe in God. I didn't believe in humanity. If you have seen those cruelty with those Nazis, how they treated human beings, you know, I said, what are we? What humans are we? You know, I was really very, very depressed and discouraged about life and about everything. And Otto really helped me a lot. And when I finished school, I didn't know what to do with my life. And Otto and my mother decided I should become a photographer. And I didn't really care. Whatever they would have suggested, I would have said okay. And I was still unhappy in Holland. So it's a lovely country. When I go there now, I don't know why I was unhappy. But, you know, I had bad memories. And so Otto knew somebody in London who had a photographic studio. And he got me a job there for a year. And I moved to London in 1951. And I lived in a little boarding house where was a young man who had come from Israel to study economics. And we became good friends, and we went for long walks. And after 6 months, he said to me, Eva, I've fallen in love with you. Will you marry me? And when I finished my study, we can start a new life and go to Israel. And I said to him, no, thank you.
No, thank you.
And he was a bit amazed because, but you like me? I said, yes, but I've got a widowed mother in Amsterdam. I was very, very close with my mother, as you can imagine. And when the year is over, I'm going back to her. And then Otto Frank came over one day, and I told him that. And he said, well, you know, your mother and me have fallen in love as well. And once you get settled, we like to get married. So I went back to this young man and I said, well, you can marry me now. which we did. We went back to Amsterdam, got married in 1952, and Otto and my mother got married the next year, 1953.
And as I remember, you asked your mother for advice because you had another boyfriend. And you asked your mother which one you should marry.
I know.
And what did she tell you?
Well, the other boyfriend was in Holland, so before I left, I had promised him we would get engaged and get married. But, you know, through all this experience, I didn't know what was love. I just liked, you know, and I really wanted to get settled. I wanted to start my own family. And so we took a big risk. My husband said he was Israeli, which he wasn't. He was really a German refugee. I told him I was Dutch, which I wasn't. I was a stateless, still a stateless person. And we didn't talk about our past. That came only after 40 years later, you know. So, and that advice now, young people, you know, you never know what you get, but you. But you have to take a chance in life, and it's not always easy, but you have to have a bit endurance, you know. We had difficult time to get to know each other and so on, but we were married for 62 years, so it was obviously a good choice.
But you have to share the advice you're... I'm sorry. The advice your mom gave you about which one of those two young men you should marry. Remember?
Yeah, sure, I remember. When my mother came to meet my future husband, perhaps, she knew both of them a little bit, and she said, you know, I was, through all this, I was not an intellectual, I didn't want to learn, and so I was still quite miserable. But the only thing I wanted was to get a family. And so my mother said, Zvi, that was the Israeli young man, well, not quite Israeli, really German, but he said, he's an intellectual, he will uplift you, he will teach you things. You know, I had missed many, many years of school. And Henk, the Dutch boy, he's very sweet, and you know, you'll have fun with him, but there's no depth in him. And so I took my mother's advice, and I chose Zvi, and it was true, you know, he knew everything. He read to me all kinds of things, he educated me, and this is what I've become, you know, very interested in everything that goes on in the world. And I'm very pleased, I'm very grateful my mother chose my husband for me.
And it was 64 years of marriage.
Yeah.
It must have been, sometimes it must have been difficult, and that you must have felt like you were living in the shadow of Anne with Otto.
Yeah, definitely. You know, I had gone through the same thing, and I even have survived, and I was always introduced Otto Frank's stepdaughter. Yeah. And, you know, I thought I'm a person in my own right, especially when I started to be more educated and more, you know, I think I've done quite a lot of now. I was a good photographer. Later I had this antique shop, and was quite knowledgeable about lots of things. I read a lot. And, you know, I said I'm my own person.
Right.
And it took a long time. And even now, you know, when on my books, the publisher, the first book, Eva's Story, when I had this story and I wanted it to be published, the publisher said, only if we put on Stepsister of Anne Frank. And I accepted that, of course, because I was an unknown person, so, and it's true, you know. But even now, very often when I speak in all those different cities in America, they make a brochure. I must say your brochure is nice, I am on it, but most of the brochures is a big picture of Anne in the front, and then in the back is me. And, and that's true. But I must tell you, after many, many years of being Anne Frank's stepsister, I realized I mustn't be jealous of somebody who had no life. I was very lucky, I made it, I had a wonderful husband, I have 3 daughters, 5 grandchildren. Unfortunately, Anne died when she was not even 15 years old. So, you know, I've accepted it now, but it still annoys me a little bit.
I want to talk a little bit about your hologram. We got to see 116 cameras. And by the way, I want the audience to know that of all the thousands of times that she's spoken, this is the first time that's opened.
Yeah, that we have shown it at that time.
So wasn't that great that we did it?
Yeah.
And I was sitting next to Eva, and she said, I really liked the way you opened this. So I just wanted you to know that. Anyway, this documentary was up last year for an Oscar for Best Short Documentary of the Year. And it was, first of all, it was one of 10 nominated, and then it made the cut down to 5. And I still am so mad that it didn't win.
It didn't make it.
Didn't make it, but it should have. And I want you to talk a little bit about the interview process for this, because they asked you 1,000 questions, didn't they?
Yes, that's right.
And how many days, how many hours?
It took a whole week. I was sitting, I call it a cage. You might not have seen it. It was an enormous globe with 160 cameras attached on it and many, many, many lights. And I had to sit every day for 8 hours. We had a little lunch break, but nevertheless, we had to sit and in exactly the same position, because it is shown now as a one, and so when children come, I can't have moved around and sit once like this, or once with different clothes. So I had to wear the whole 8 days the same clothes, and the lights, you know, and I had to talk just for 3 minutes. If I went over the time, they had to redo it, because the cameras which were attached were only filming 3 minutes. So it was, and the people who interviewed you were outside this globe, and I had to look at them through a mirror. But when I told a story which was a bit emotional, or I didn't concentrate, I didn't look at them when they did 5 minutes, 1 minute, 3 minutes, you know, and missed it sometimes. And then everybody was quite upset, really. That was because to redo the whole thing. But I got experienced, you know, I started to watch out more carefully. But it was, you know, besides it is emotional to go through all your whole stories, there are a lot of things we have left out. My mother was selected, I thought I had lost her. You know, a lot of things happen, and it is all in this interview. And it was for about a year in New York, and now it's going to go permanently. It is already actually in Chicago, in the museum there.
And I have to say that when Eva was in La Crosse, Wisconsin, our other home, the second time, which was September of 2017, we were together about a week. And then my husband and I were going to New York City, and we went to the Jewish Heritage Museum to see her hologram. And I was worried, after being able to hug her and, you know, be with her for a week, I thought, oh, this is not going to be good. You know, seeing this hologram, it's not going to seem real. And instead, I have to say, it
felt real.
It was good. It really, I'm happy about it.
Really, it moves, you know, it moved, and it's three-dimensional. And I went, of course, there to look at it, and then they asked me, ask yourself a question. Which I did. And I asked them a peculiar question. I asked them, can I see your number? Because I've been told that very often young people, children, would like to see my tattoo, but they're embarrassed that perhaps I don't want to show it, that I might not like it, so they don't ask it. But the holograms, they have no scruple to ask, you know, and they ask me all the time now, sitting there, can we see your number? And indeed, I lift my sleeve up and I show it to them.
It seems to me that you weren't happy with the color gray that they gave you to wear. Is that correct?
Yes.
You wanted another color.
They buy the clothes for you, you know, and they say, what is your favorite color? And I said, blue. They said, all right, we get you a blue outfit. And then they got a gray outfit. So.
And I wanted to mention that in that video, there was this beautiful young woman with her throughout the whole thing, and that's her granddaughter, Lisa. I just thought they would like to know that.
Yeah.
She's so lovely. Rabbi
my granddaughter spent the whole week, well, 10 days we were in LA to support me, and she had never been in America before, and I said, you don't have to come every day with me, go and have a bit of a sightseeing. And she said, no, I really want to be there to support you.
Yes. Rabbi brought up the Newport Beach incident that happened very recently, and he mentioned that you were in Newport Beach, and that you, after that incident where those kids were saluting their swastika that they made out of their beer cups.
A whole row of swastikas they made.
Made out of their beer cups, and then they got a hold of you. A rabbi knew that you were in the area and asked you to speak to them. What I want to talk to you about is, what was that like? Because it hit the headlines. It was really in the news a lot. What was it like talking to those kids?
Well, I was asked to come, and I was really very curious to find out why they had done that. I couldn't imagine that 16-year-old having a party do anything like that, even get the idea to do anything like that. And so I did go to them, and I told them, they were 16-year-old, I told them, when I was 16-year-old, I told them, of course, a little bit about my camp experience, but as well, with 60-year-old, I heard that I'd lost my family, my father and my brother. So they started to cry. You know, they really felt at this age, how they would have felt if they would lose their family and so on. And then I said to them, what really, did you realize that you were hurting many, many people who had gone through terrible suffering? And they said they didn't. First, they didn't say anything. They just looked down, you know, they were very embarrassed. But then I encouraged, it took me quite a while to get anything out of them. And then one said, well, we didn't really realize what it meant. And I was shocked. I said, after 70 years of the Holocaust has happened, that you don't know what Hitler and the swastika stand for? And then the principal of the school said, I said as the principal, haven't they learned anything about that? And he said, well, with 16, they just learn American history, but next term they were going to learn about the Holocaust.
Yeah.
So I said, that's a little bit late. And
yes.
And the parents were there as well. I think they were even more embarrassed than the children. But they were expelled from the school, and they had 10 days where they were taken to LA to see the Holocaust Museum, to see the Anne Frank story. They had to go to lectures. They were really, for this 10 days where they were not at school, they had to learn a lot about this dark period in history. So, and they even then later, when they were a bit more at ease with me, they said, you know, it has changed their life, and they were going to work for the good now. And you know, I think it was very, very important that it come in the open. And the teacher even admitted that it was not the first time. There are swastikas on school desks, there are swastikas on their lockers, and messages are sent, but of course it was never in the open. So everybody was actually quite pleased that somebody had put it on social media, and it was a news item now.
Oh, Eva, despite growing up in what was far from a wonderful world, you've accomplished a great deal. You had two prosperous businesses, you married, and you raised a family, and here you are. Can I tell how old you are?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. She's going to be 90 May 11th. And she speaks all over the world. And I just want to say you are such an inspiration to us, Eva. And I want to thank you from Team Eva Austin and the entire audience. Let's give her a big hand. No, you sit. Yes! Thank you.
through speaking, I've met so many wonderful people in this town. I've made many new friends here now. And, you know, I do believe in humanity now. I believe that we can together make a big effort and create a peaceful, happy, equal world for everybody to enjoy. We are blessed with a wonderful globe, a wonderful earth, who gives us enough food, enough air, enough everything, and we should appreciate it, but we have to share it with everybody.
Amen.
You've been a wonderful audience. Thank you very, very much. Have you got
We're going to do a Q&A now.
Yeah.
Okay. So you can sit down. Thank you so much. I want to make sure that you understand that we have books for sale in the lobby, and we're going to have a Q&A right now. How's that? So we have mics on both sides, and if you have a question, come on up and ask the question. I'm going to repeat it so that I make sure that everybody hears it, and what a great opportunity for all of us. Okay.
Hi. We have already somebody. You've got a good voice.
Yeah, I have a big, strong Jewish voice.
Good.
My name is Danielle. I was with Rabbi Blumoff on the Poland trip that we went on a couple of weeks ago, where we went to see Auschwitz. And my question is, we heard a lot of stories from survivors that didn't want to go back to Auschwitz and thought that their family members that had died wouldn't want to go back to Auschwitz, that the memory would be too difficult. Have you been back, and how do you feel about survivors going back and visiting?
Okay. She was on the trip to Poland with the rabbi that he spoke about, and she's heard that many survivors that were in Auschwitz don't want to go back. And she's wondering if you have ever gone back to Auschwitz.
Well, I never wanted to go back, not near the place, as you can well imagine. But in 1990, when it was the first time that you could go back to Auschwitz, because it was not anymore under the Russian and Poland, the Dutch television asked me to make a program with them. And I talked it over with my husband and my mother, who was still alive then. And I said, well, you know, of course I don't want to see the place. I know too much of it. But perhaps when I go there, perhaps I can close the circle of it. And as well, some of the Russian soldiers who liberated the camp were going to be there. And I thought I really would like to say thank you to them. And so I did go. And my husband went with me, and it was a very, very emotional day. And it was still very raw at that time. It was how it really was when I left it. And then a few years later, a German television asked me to do a program. And I thought that's important, so I went with a German one. And it was shown on national television. And a few years ago, a Japanese television group, and they came to me and said, the Japanese don't know anything about don't learn anything about the history of Europe, the wars, not even their own history. And through a documentary, it would be very, very important to educate the people. So, of course, I agreed again. And, you know, I went to Japan anywhere before already. And I was amazed how I get letters from them, long, long letters translated about how it impacted them to see anything like that. So obviously it was worthwhile to do this. But I would never go. There are some survivors who go, even taking groups of people and explain to them how it was and tell them stories. That I would never do.
Thank you. Right here.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Angela Benavides Garza from Austin, Texas, here with my sister.
Can you go just a little bit behind that?
Better?
It echoes.
Yeah, it's echoing, so.
This is better right here? Okay.
Try it now.
Our grandfather fought in World War II, and we hold a letter from President Trump, and we really didn't understand the significance of that letter. He couldn't read or write, but spoke 5 languages and fought in 5 countries. he knew he stood up for something much bigger than he understood millions did, and he survived and came back. He never got to meet you, and today we meet you as war heroes' granddaughters. If you had something to tell all the war heroes who stood up for that time,
excuse me,
what would you tell them today?
Okay, her grandfather, right? Fought in the war, and she's wondering if you have anything that you could say to war heroes,
Yes.
correct? If you could say something to war heroes, what would you say?
Well, you know, I'm always surprised how many young men volunteer to go into the army. Because, you know, if men would say, I don't want to go in the army, I'm not fighting, then perhaps we would have less wars. But if there is somewhere where you have to defend, like, of course, if there is a purpose, like this war, if the army wouldn't have liberated, the American army not liberated Europe, I don't know what would have happened, you know? So in certain cases it is necessary, but in many cases it is not necessary.
Mm-hmm.
So the soldiers have to really try to choose if it is a war to liberate people or to attack people.
Okay, thank you. Over here.
Hello, can you hear me? Hi. I had read Corrie ten Boom's book, The Hiding Place, and also
I'm sorry.
Anne Frank's.
It's difficult.
It's really. It's not your fault. You had start again, please.
So I read Corrie ten Boom's.
Okay, Corrie ten Boom.
The Hiding Place.
Hiding
and
Place.
Also Anne Frank's. And so I was curious though on with Eva's hiding, if it was a bit like Anne Frank's, where it was kind of the built-in whole house, or like Corrie ten Boom's, where it was more of like they were out a bit more and then they had to go and hide quickly if the Gestapo showed up.
She's read The Hiding Place.
Yes.
By Corrie ten Boom, and she's also read The Diary of Anne Frank, and she's wondering if your experience in hiding was at all similar to theirs. You're certainly familiar with Anne's up in the annex.
It was not at all similar to the experience with the Franks had, because there were 8 people there, and she was with her family, with all her family, and there was always something going on, so they never were bored. They had quarrels, but it was different from me. I didn't have quarrels with my mother, but the boredom was unbelievable for an active child of 13, not to be able to go out, not to meet with friends, not even going to school. You know, this was really, really hardship. Anna did a lot of wonderful schoolwork with her father, her beloved father. So in all, Anne actually enjoyed being together with her family for 2 years. Of course, we were afraid. Of course, I wouldn't say it was ideal, but it was by no means as bad as when you were separated and lonely and missing conversation, missing people. And there are some people who stayed in terrible, terrible accommodation. Some children were even locked up in little cupboards. And when they came out, they couldn't walk. You know, there's some terrible places where people were hidden for many, many, many years. So it was a wonderful film, The Zookeeper's Wife. If anybody has not seen it, please see it. People were hiding under in the rooms where the animals have been and things like that. You know, hiding is definitely not something I can recommend. In England, they did even a school to show how it would feel. They put children up in a derelict building for a weekend, and you know, to see how it feels if you were not in touch with the outside world.
Thank you. Yes.
Hi, I'm Charlie Rosenblum. Thank you very much for being here, Eva. My question is this. Lately, there's been a rise of anti-Semitism in Europe and in the United States.
Okay, can you start on that question again, please?
Lately, there's been a rise of anti-Semitism in Europe and in the United States. Yeah. My question is this. When you go to Europe and run your speaking tour there, how are you received, and has there been a reaction to your speaking tour there?
Okay. He said that we know for sure that there's been a rise of anti-Semitism in Europe and in the United States, and he's wondering if, when you go on your speaking tours in Europe, if you encounter more anti-Semitism.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Exactly.
Do you get more anti-Semitism in Europe or in the United States? Do you find that anti-Semitism as you travel?
Well, I mean, I've never been, personally, never been confronted with it, you know. Nobody has ever said to me, dirty Jew or anything like that. But I know it is there. But, you know, you can't, I mean, there are even people who compare it to Hitler time, and this I think that is outrageous because it's nothing like it. It is individuals, it's not from the government. It becomes dangerous if the government approves of it. But the government is everywhere against it, in every country. They try to protect the people and punish the people who do things like that. So at the moment, I don't think Jews or Muslim or Christian or Buddhists or so have to be afraid. But we have to keep an eye on it, and we have to control it if it gets out of hand.
Well, thank you for your courage in speaking up. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to come right over here. Yes.
In just a few weeks, on May the 1st, is Yom HaShoah, the Day of Holocaust Remembrance. And here in Austin, at Congregation of Good Asachim, everyone in this audience is invited to join us. We will be interviewing on stage a Holocaust survivor from Berlin and her daughter. What advice, Mrs. Schloss, would you give to the second generation so the lessons of the Holocaust will not be forgotten?
Okay. He said that on May 1st at his synagogue, they're going to be listening to a survivor from Berlin and the daughter.
And her daughter, yes.
And he's wondering what advice you would give to the second generation. Just to, what advice on?
So the lessons of the Shoah will not be forgotten.
Okay, what advice would you give to the second generation so the lessons of the Shoah will not be forgotten?
Well, Jewish people don't forget any of their history. You know, we celebrate or remember all our persecutions, everything that happened to us through all the history. So for Jewish people, it's not a problem. But you know, I think nowadays, through the films, through the books, we have to teach it in schools. And then, and it is amazing how, when children learn it in school, how interested they become in the subject, because it is really something which is not normal in human beings. Shouldn't do things like that, but people are fascinated by it and try to learn more. And you know, if you teach them a little bit, I think the interest will grow.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Hi, so first off, I'd like to say thank you for speaking to the kids my age about all this stuff, because I do feel like it's something that should always be taught in schools. Because I homeschool and I learned at a very early age, so to hear that 16-year-olds nowadays don't really know about it is a little upsetting to me. But my question is, you mentioned how your brother started painting and how he put one of his paintings underneath the floor with a note. Has that painting ever been recovered, or is it still somewhere out there?
Okay, what's the question? I'm sorry.
So her brother...
Her brother, Heinz?
Yeah, made a painting, and he put it in the floorboard with a note. Was that painting ever recovered, or is it still out there?
Oh, great question. She's asking about Heinz's paintings. Did you ever go back and get them? Yes, tell her.
Of course I did. Of course
That's
I
a
did.
great question.
When Otto got the diary, you know, through all the terrible things which has happened, I must say I'd forgotten about them. And as soon as Otto had the diary, I said to my mother, we have to go and find the paintings. And indeed, we did find 30 wonderful oil paintings, and I donated them a few years ago to the Resistance Museum in Amsterdam. And they made a big exhibition, and you can still see them there. So if ever you go to Amsterdam, visit the Anne Frank house, go as well to the Resistance Museum. And we have got now an exhibition about Heinz's life and his paintings started actually in South Africa. We have got one in London, in England as well. And I'm trying to get an exhibition ready as well for America.
Mm-hmm.
And Darrell when I spoke once, has seen a lot of, not the originals, but the copies.
Right.
Which, nowadays you can make very, very wonderful copies. So,
Yes.
you know, Anne said she would like to, when she dies, she would like to become immortal. Well, she has achieved that. Everywhere in the world I go and I mention her name, everybody knows who she is. But very often my mother and me said, Heinz, who was as well such a wonderful young man, so talented, so gentle, and has achieved so much in a short life, nobody knows about him. So I wrote a book about him called The Promise. You can find it on Amazon as well, and there's some of this painting as well printed in it. And you know, when he was 12 years old, being so gentle and so artistic, he was very much afraid of dying. And so one night he said to me, what will happen when we die? I'm afraid. And I said, well, let's ask our Father who has all the answers. And in the morning we went to him and he said, Papi, what will happen when we die? And my father said, well, of course your body will integrate, but when you have a family, you will live on in your children. And then this 12-year-old boy said, but what if I die before I have a family? And my father thought a moment, and he said, well, you're all a link in a chain which goes from generation to generation, and even if you have a short life, nothing gets lost. You will never be forgotten. So this is why now my life work is still trying to get this exhibition into America so that everybody can see what he has achieved in his short life.
Those of you that bought the book Eva's Story, inside that book there are several beautiful colored pictures of some of his paintings. All right, next. Oh, I'm sorry.
We have time for one more question.
Just, okay, oh, that's so sad, but I get it. Okay. Oh, look at here.
My name is Laurel White. I am 8. My question is, how was your mother saved from
How is, I'm sorry,
How was your mother saved from being gassed?
how is,
Her mother saved from being gassed?
how was her Mother's Day?
How was her mother saved from being gassed?
Oh, sorry.
What was that?
Anyway, how was your mother saved from being gassed?
Oh, well,
sorry.
I'm afraid that is quite a complicated story, but when I wrote my first book, Eva Story, which is available here, she wrote, actually, the publisher said, let your mother write herself her experience, what has happened. And she did. So it's a whole chapter, wonderfully explained. But I just want to tell you, she was saved. It's too difficult to explain so quickly. But when she walked to the gas chamber, she prayed to God that she was ready to die. She was 40 years old, but she prayed that her children should survive. And then she was saved. So, and she lived another 57 years after that.
Right. Thank you.
We should stop.
Yeah, now we're done with questions, unfortunately, but we're going to have a presentation. Would the gals come up from the White Rose Society, please?
They're going to say something.
Oh, that's so sweet.
I like it up.
I don't know if everyone can hear us, but we are an organization called White Rose Society at Texas LL. Thank you.
That's better.
We're an organization called White Rose Society with the University of Texas through Texas LL. We try to prevent genocide and honor the Holocaust victims and remember the Holocaust itself. Tonight we are here to present Eva with some roses, and we just want to say something to you real quick. Eva, we're so honored and privileged to be here in your presence today. your story made us remember the perseverance and determination of all the Jewish people.
Your strength is the reason that Taylor and I are here today and continue fighting to never forget and continue on with the Jewish legacy. So we thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, thank you.
Oh, they're beautiful.
Beautiful, thank you. Oh, thank you. Well, give it to my father here. Thank you. I just would like to tell you, the White Rose was a symbol
I don't get to keep them?
of a resistance group of young students in Germany who were unfortunately caught and executed by the Nazis. It's a very moving, wonderful story. There's a book, a film, a play. It's called The White Rose.
Yes, beautiful.
So there was some resistance in Germany. Not all Germans were following Hitler, especially with the young people.
Thank you, ladies. That was really lovely. Now, Pastor?
Yes, ma'am. I'm next. Hi, my name is Brandon Weir. I'm one of the pastors here at the fellowship, and I just want to say what an honor and a privilege it was to host you tonight. Thank you so much for coming here and being a part of this. We heard you, we listened, and now we go to act, right? Why don't y'all stand up and give her a round of applause, Eva.
Yes.
Thank you, thank you. You've been a wonderful audience. I wish I had more time to talk to you the whole evening.
We want to thank you so much for your bravery, your honesty, your willingness to be transparent, and we want to thank you all for being here.
Yes.
I just want to take a moment and thank all of you for coming. This has been an act of love and excitement and commitment for all of us of Team Eva. We could not have done it without Daryl. And there are 8 women who came together in January with Daryl's guidance and passion and commitment to make this event happen and get Eva here. It hasn't been easy, but it's been just a wonderful, wonderful experience, and so thank you for being here. We could not have done this without Rebecca. Where are you?
Yes. She was the star of our team.
Oh, right. Oh, yeah.
Remember I told you?
Yeah. That's right.
Come on, sweetie.
We met every Monday for 3 months. We brainstormed. We had great ideas.
Joyce,
oh, there you are. Great. We had great ideas. The key thing was that we compromised. We talked about it and compromised along the way in terms of what and how we were going to do this. But as I said a moment before, we could not have done this without you, Rebecca. No. Your guidance, your commitment, your ideas, your wisdom in technology. Oh my gosh. She told us all how inept we were, but that's okay because we are. So thank you so much from the bottom of our hearts. Thank you. And thank you to Fellowship Church for having us. This could not have happened without you, and we so much appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we have
Thank you, thank you. I just want to add, those women were fantastic. I've met some of them I knew already, but some I've met only today. But I think we must thank their husbands as well, because I'm sure they were good support to the ladies.
That's true. That's very true.
Thank you, thank you.
And I just really want to give a great shout out and thank you to the Fellowship Church. I mean, right?
The number one priority was keep it free.
Yeah, yes. Yes. The number one priority when our team met was we wanted to not charge because we wanted everybody to be able to come. So yay! And thank you. She said you're a great audience, and you really, really are. Thank you for the love.
Thank you.